I was writing a book. Well, trying to anyway. I had been stuck for weeks, and the pressure of city life was eating away at me. People were always around, always asking questions, or worse, offering suggestions about what I should write. I needed quiet, uninterrupted quiet. So I rented a cabin in the woods, about as far from civilization as you can get without a tent and sleeping bag. The cabin was small, weathered but sturdy. It was perched at the edge of a dense forest, the nearest town miles away. The owner, a quiet, grizzled man who had been renting out the place for years, gave me the key and barely spoke a word. I was just happy to get away from everything. I thought the isolation would help me focus on my writing. No distractions, no interruptions, just the sound of my own thoughts and the distant calls of birds. The first few days were perfect. I wrote during the day, my fingers flying over the keys as the words finally started to flow. The air was crisp, and the sound of wind in the trees gave me a kind of peace I hadn't known I'd been missing. At night, I'd eat a simple meal, light the fireplace, and curl up with a good book or just sit in front of the fire, thinking about the story I was working on. There was something calming about the crackle of the fire and the smell of pine in the air. It felt like the world had disappeared, and all that was left was me and my work. But as the days wore on, I started to feel something. It wasn't immediate, but slowly, over time, a subtle unease began to creep in. It wasn't the cabin itself. Nothing about it felt overtly wrong, but the isolation, the silence, the deep, dense forest surrounding me. It was too much. At night, I would lie awake in bed, listening to the sounds of the woods, the occasional creak of the cabin settling, and the rustling of leaves. I wasn't used to being so far removed from everything. It was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, almost suffocating. On the fourth night, I woke up suddenly, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I don't know what woke me. There was no noise, no warning, just a cold, prickling sensation on my skin. I lay there, motionless, staring into the darkness of the room. The fire had long since burned out, leaving the cabin in complete blackness. I turned my head to glance toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but the pale moonlight that filtered through the gaps was enough to see the shapes of the trees outside. And then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, a light tap, tap, tap against the window, barely audible but unmistakable. My heart skipped a beat. I held my breath, straining to listen. The tapping continued, and it sounded wrong. It wasn't a bird pecking at the glass or a branch brushing against it. This was something different, something deliberate. I got out of bed slowly, careful not to make a sound. My feet felt cold against the wooden floor. I pulled the curtains apart, my hands shaking, and looked outside. The moonlight barely illuminated the yard, but I could make out a figure standing motionless in the middle of the small clearing just beyond the cabin. A man. He was standing there, facing the cabin, his body silhouetted against the dark forest behind him. I couldn't see his face, only the vague outline of a figure in the moonlight. He wasn't moving, not a twitch, not a shift of weight. He was just standing there, staring in my direction. I don't know how long I stared back at him, but my blood turned to ice. I couldn't understand how he had gotten there. There were no cars parked nearby, no signs of anyone approaching. The cabin was miles away from the nearest road, hidden deep in the woods. I hadn't heard a single vehicle, not a single sound from the outside. How had he gotten here? And why was he just standing there, staring at me? I didn't know what to do. My instincts told me to call the police, but what would I even say? There's a man standing outside my cabin at 3 a.m., and I'm not sure how he got here. It sounded ridiculous, but I didn't feel safe. Something about the way he was standing there, so still, so unnatural, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't move. I didn't want him to know I was watching. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table and dialed the local police. "Hello, this is Officer Daniels. What's your emergency?" "There's a man outside my cabin. I don't know how he got here, but he's just standing there, staring at me," I said, my voice trembling. "Are you sure? Could it be a hiker or a lost camper?" She asked, but I could hear the skepticism in her voice. "I don't know. There are no roads around here, and I haven't seen anyone since I got here," I replied. "All right, we'll send someone out. Stay inside. Don't approach him. We'll be there soon," she said. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the man through the window. He didn't move. The tapping on the glass had stopped, but he remained there, his figure unmoving in the moonlight. Every time I blinked, I felt like he was closer, though I knew that was just my fear playing tricks on me. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, but by the time they got to the cabin, the man was gone. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no rustling in the bushes, nothing. He had just vanished. The officers looked around the cabin and the surrounding woods but found no trace of anyone. No footprints, no tire marks. They reassured me that it was probably just a prank or someone passing through, but I wasn't convinced. There was something deeply unsettling about the whole situation. The way he stood there, motionless, staring, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like a person. The next morning, when I went downstairs to make coffee, I noticed something strange. The wooden floor in the living room was scratched. Deep gouges ran across the floorboards, like something had been dragged across them. I bent down to take a closer look. The marks weren't from furniture or anything I had moved. They were too jagged, too uneven. They looked like claw marks, as if something with nails or claws, had scraped across the floor. But what really caught my attention was the mark near the bed. I hadn't noticed it last night, probably because the room was too dark, but now it was clear. A handprint, deep gouges in the wood that formed the shape of a hand, fingers splayed wide, as if something had been reaching for me while I slept. The handprint was right next to my bed, as if whatever it was had been leaning over me, its fingers scraping against the floor. I couldn't explain it. I hadn't heard any sounds during the night, no scratching, no movement, nothing. The handprint was fresh, though, and the scratches on the floor were deep. Whoever or whatever had done it had used something sharp, something powerful. I tried to rationalize it, but my mind wouldn't let me. I didn't want to be paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that cabin. The man outside, the claw marks, the handprint, it all felt connected, like some kind of warning. I packed up my things that morning. I didn't even finish my coffee. I just wanted to leave. I couldn't stay in that cabin any longer. As I walked out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The woods seemed to close in around me, the trees standing tall like silent sentinels, their branches creaking in the wind. I couldn't get out fast enough. I haven't been back to that cabin since. I don't know who the man was or how he got there or what he wanted. Maybe it was just a random encounter, a strange coincidence. Maybe it was nothing, but I don't think so. I've heard rumors since I left, stories about strange things happening to people who rent that cabin. People talk about unexplained noises, strange figures in the woods, and deep gouges in the floor that don't make sense. I don't know what happened that night, but I do know one thing. I'll never go back. Some places aren't meant to be explored, no matter how quiet, no matter how isolated. Some places should stay undisturbed, and some things are better left unseen. The cabin was supposed to be a dream getaway for our little family. It was tucked deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest neighbor or any sign of modern civilization. My wife, Emily, and our daughter, Lily, had been talking about this weekend for weeks. We all needed the escape. No work, no distractions, just a few days to unwind in the quiet of nature. The place was perfect when we arrived. The cabin looked like something out of a postcard, surrounded by tall trees and with a stream flowing nearby. There was a wooden deck with chairs, a small fire pit, and a stone chimney that let out a soft plume of smoke. It felt cozy and safe, nestled in its own little corner of the world. After a long drive, we unloaded our bags and settled in. The first evening was peaceful. We made dinner together, played some board games, and went for a short walk by the creek. Lily, full of energy, ran ahead and laughed as she kicked up leaves. We didn't hear anything unusual, didn't notice anything strange at all. The place felt secluded, yes, but in a good way. We were so far from everything that I felt like I could breathe again. As night fell, the darkness of the woods closed in around us. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the wind. The cabin's single light flickered on, casting soft shadows against the walls. We sat in the living room, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the crackling sound it made. Lily had been playing with her stuffed animals, and Emily was reading a book. I remember feeling content, like everything was exactly how it was supposed to be. That night, as we were getting ready to settle down, the first strange thing happened. I was in the bathroom, brushing my teeth, when I heard something from the front door. It was a soft scraping sound, followed by a quiet thud. I assumed it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer, looking for food. I wasn't concerned, but it was strange enough to make me pause. I called out to Emily, but she didn't respond, so I shrugged it off and went to check the door. The porch was empty. The night air was cold, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck prickle as I stepped outside for a moment. The woods were dark beyond the cabin, and the trees were still. No animals, no movement, just the wind. I locked the door and went back inside, thinking nothing of it. It wasn't until later, just as we were about to go to bed, that the sounds came again. This time louder, a distinct tapping on the door, followed by a faint creaking sound as if something, or someone, was leaning against it. My heart skipped a beat. Emily looked at me wide-eyed. What was that? I didn't have an answer. I walked over to the window and peered outside, trying to see what was out there. The porch was empty again. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching us. My eyes scanned the woods, the trees seeming to close in around the cabin. I dismissed it. It was probably the wind, I thought. Maybe the branches of the trees were brushing against the walls, causing the sounds. But something nagged at me, something I couldn't ignore. Lily had already fallen asleep, her soft breathing filling the quiet of the room. Emily and I lay in bed, both of us wide awake. Neither of us wanted to admit it, but we both felt uneasy. I kept telling myself it was just the isolation, the odd sounds that came with being so far away from civilization. But the longer I lay there, the more I felt something wasn't right. Then we heard it again, a soft thud, followed by a scraping noise. This time, it came from the front door again, but it wasn't like the wind or an animal. It was more deliberate, more insistent. It sounded like someone was trying to open the door. My pulse raced. I got up slowly, careful not to wake Emily. I crept to the window and peered through the blinds. The porch was empty, but then my eyes caught something in the distance, just at the edge of the light. There, standing motionless at the edge of the porch, was a figure. At first, I thought it was someone playing a prank. Maybe it was a neighbor who had come to check on us, though I couldn't imagine anyone being that close, especially not so late at night. But as I stared, I realized the figure wasn't moving. It wasn't walking around or looking at anything. It was just standing there, facing the cabin. It was too dark to see clearly, but the figure looked tall, its outline shifting slightly as if caught in the wind. I couldn't make out any details, but the shape seemed solid, defined, and it wasn't leaving. It wasn't like any animal I knew. I felt my stomach drop. I pulled away from the window, my breath shallow. My hands shook as I went to Emily, shaking her gently. She woke with a start, confused at first. "Someone's out there," I said, my voice tight. "On the porch." We both stared at the door for a long moment, neither of us saying anything. We could hear the wind howling outside, but other than that, there was nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, just silence. I locked the door again, checked the windows, and pulled the shades down. We both knew it was better not to open them again. The night dragged on in tense silence. We stayed awake, every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, making us jump. But no more sounds came, no more figures appeared. When morning came, we felt drained, both of us exhausted from the sleepless night. I stepped outside first, checking the porch, the area around the cabin. There was nothing unusual, nothing but the cold, quiet forest. The ground was covered in leaves, no signs of recent activity. But then I noticed something. Footprints. They weren't animal tracks. They were human-sized, too large to be Lily's or Emily's. They circled around the cabin, coming from the edge of the woods. The prints looked fresh, still deep in the soft earth, and they led up to the porch and then stopped there. But the strangest thing was that the prints didn't stop there. They kept going, heading back into the woods, and then they vanished. There were no further prints leading away from the woods, no trail to follow. It was as if whoever had been out there just disappeared into thin air. Emily came outside after me, looking down at the prints. "What do you think happened?" "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaking, "but I don't like it." We spent the rest of the morning packing up. We didn't want to stay another night. Lily, oblivious to the tension between us, skipped around the yard, picking up sticks and pretending they were swords. She seemed to be enjoying herself, happy as ever, but I could tell Emily and I were both on edge. We kept looking over our shoulders, half expecting to see the figure standing there again. As we gathered our things and prepared to leave, I went inside to check one last time. When I entered the living room, I saw something on the coffee table. It was a drawing. Lily had been drawing all weekend, her usual innocent pictures of animals and flowers. But this one was different. In the center of the paper was a tall man, standing in the woods. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, his face shadowed, but his posture was rigid, unnervingly still. The figure was outlined in dark ink, and the forest around him was a maze of twisted trees. I swallowed hard. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the drawing. I didn't want to ask, but I did anyway. "Lily, who is this?" She looked up at me, her face serious. "That man. He was watching us all weekend." I felt the blood drain from my face. I asked her when she saw him, but she just shrugged. "I saw him in the woods, standing there. He was watching us." Emily came into the room and saw the drawing. She didn't say anything at first, but I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear I was feeling. We left the cabin not long after that, without saying much to each other. The drive back was quiet, and the closer we got to home, the more I tried to push the events of the weekend out of my mind. But even now, months later, I can't stop thinking about it. The woods are quiet, I tell myself. The figure was just some weird coincidence. Maybe Lily's imagination got the best of her. But when I close my eyes, I still see that man standing in the dark, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. I still hear that soft scraping sound at the door, and I wonder, just for a moment, if that man is still watching us. I had been feeling overwhelmed with the noise, the people, the deadlines, everything that seemed to pile up on me when I was living in the city. So I decided to do something for myself, something quiet, something away from the constant buzz of everyday life. I rented a small cabin in the woods for a few days, hoping that a little time away from everything would help me clear my head. The cabin was a cozy, isolated spot, just far enough from the nearest town to give me the solitude I craved. It had a certain charm to it, too. Weathered wood on the outside, a stone fireplace inside, and a lovely little porch that overlooked a vast stretch of forest. I thought it was exactly what I needed. When I arrived, the place felt peaceful. The air was fresh. The quiet was so thick it was almost palpable. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves in the wind and the occasional bird call. I could feel the tension in my shoulders begin to melt away as I unpacked my things and made myself at home. I spent the first day taking walks through the woods, exploring the area, breathing in the clean air. The cabin, while old and showing signs of age, was everything I'd hoped for. It felt warm, welcoming, like it had been waiting for me. The first night, I made myself a simple dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and curled up on the couch in front of the fire with a book. The world outside seemed so far away, and I allowed myself to relax completely. I slept deeply, not a single nightmare or anxious thought to disturb my rest. The next morning, I woke to the smell of pine and earth drifting in through the open window. It was idyllic. On the second night, things started to feel different. It was subtle at first, I had gotten into the habit of taking long walks in the afternoon and had spent the day exploring deeper into the woods. By the time I got back, it was dark. The cabin seemed to feel a little off, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I decided to make another dinner, but this time, instead of eating in front of the fire, I took my meal to the small dining table by the window, hoping to enjoy the view. While I was eating, I noticed something I hadn't before. At the far end of the cabin, next to the kitchen, there was a door. It was tucked away in a corner, barely noticeable unless you were looking closely. The door was small, wooden, with an old-fashioned lock on it. It looked like it led to a storage closet or a pantry, but there was something strange about it. It seemed too out of place in a cabin like this. Maybe it was the fact that the rest of the cabin felt so open and airy, and this door was so hidden. I tried not to let my curiosity get the best of me, but the more I looked at it, the more I felt like something was calling me to it. I finished my dinner, cleaned up, and tried to focus on the book I had brought with me, but my attention kept drifting back to that door. There was something unnerving about it, something that gnawed at the back of my mind. The strange thing was, I hadn't noticed the door at all when I first arrived. How could I have missed something so obvious? Finally, after what felt like hours of trying to ignore it, I stood up and walked over to the door. I reached out and turned the handle. It didn't budge. It was locked. The lock was old, rusted, and the key was nowhere in sight. I stared at it for a moment, my curiosity getting the best of me. It had been a while since I had felt this kind of strange, magnetic pull toward something, but this felt different. The door was calling to me. I walked back to the living room and tried to shake the feeling that I needed to open it, but I couldn't. The more I thought about it, the more it bugged me. Why would there be a locked door in a place like this? What was behind it? I knew it was probably nothing, just a closet or maybe a small utility room, but there was something about the door that made me feel uneasy. Couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought about the door, about what could be behind it. The sound of the wind outside the cabin started to take on a sinister tone, and every creak of the floorboards felt like someone was walking around in the darkness. I finally gave in to the feeling gnawing at me. It was nearly midnight by the time I stood up, grabbed a flashlight, and walked back to the door. My heart was beating faster now, my palms clammy. The air in the cabin felt thick, almost oppressive. I knelt down and examined the lock more closely. It was old, the metal rusted in places, but the mechanism still seemed functional. I twisted the handle again, then pressed on the door, but it wouldn't open. The lock was stuck. I took a deep breath and grabbed the flashlight, shining it down on the lock. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as I worked at the door, tugging, pushing, and eventually prying the lock free with my fingers. It took longer than I thought, but after several minutes, I finally felt the lock give way. I held my breath as the door creaked open. First, it was pitch dark behind the door. The smell hit me before anything else. A strong, sour odor, like dampness mixed with something rotting. It made me gag, and I stepped back instinctively. But I had to know what was inside. I flicked on the flashlight and pointed it toward the room beyond. What I saw made my heart skip a beat. The room was small, barely big enough for me to stand in. It had no windows, and the air was stale and heavy. The walls were bare except for something that made my blood run cold. A series of photographs pinned to the wall. At first, I thought I was seeing things, but then I realized with a sinking feeling that the photos were of me. Recent photos, taken from different angles, some close up, others further away. I could see the exact day in each photo, the clothes I had worn, the way my hair was styled. Some were from when I had been on walks, others from when I was sitting on the porch, and there were even a few from when I had been inside reading or cooking. The last photo made my blood freeze. It was taken just hours ago, through the cabin window. I was sitting at the dining table, eating my dinner, oblivious to the fact that someone had been standing outside watching me. I could barely breathe, my throat tightening as the realization hit me. Whoever had taken these pictures had been watching me for days. They had been here long before I ever arrived. Panic rose up in my chest, and I turned to run, but my feet froze in place. The front door, I rushed toward it, throwing my weight against the handle, only to find it stuck. No, it wasn't stuck. The latch had been bolted from the outside. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My heart was racing, and my mind was spinning. Someone had been here before me, someone had been watching me, and now I was trapped. The windows, the door, all of them were locked. I was alone in the woods, and whoever had been in here had been waiting for me to find the door. I wasn't alone after all. I turned to face the small, dark room again. The photos, the smell, the oppressive silence, they all told me the same thing. I wasn't safe here. Whoever had been watching me was still watching me, and now they knew I had seen what they had left behind. There was no telling when they would return or what they would do. In a panic, I rushed to the back of the cabin, searching for another way out. I checked every window, but they were all locked from the outside. I was trapped. It was as though the person who had been watching me had planned every detail, every step, long before I ever arrived. I was a guest in a cabin that had already been claimed by someone else. I don't remember exactly how long I spent trying to find a way out, but eventually, I collapsed on the floor in front of the locked door, exhausted and terrified. I had no choice but to wait. As dawn finally broke, the door creaked open. I didn't hear it, not at first, but when I looked up, I saw the figure standing in the doorway. It was someone I had never seen before, someone I couldn't recognize, their face hidden in shadows. They stepped forward, and for the first time, I realized that I wasn't alone in the woods anymore. We'd been looking forward to this weekend for months. It had been a long few months at work for both of us, and a quiet cabin in the mountains seemed like the perfect place to escape. Just the two of us, the fresh mountain air, and no distractions. We rented a small cabin up in the hills, a few hours away from the nearest town, tucked away in a remote area. There was no cell service, no Wi-Fi, just the woods, the mountains, and peace. The drive up had been beautiful. The road wound through thick forests, climbing higher and higher into the hills, with only the occasional sign of civilization. A few scattered farms and the odd hiker, but mostly it was just us, the road, and nature. When we finally arrived, it was late afternoon. The cabin was just as promised. A simple, cozy, wooden structure with a porch, a fireplace inside, and windows that looked out over the valley below. The place felt old but well-maintained, the kind of rustic charm you could only find in these isolated spots. Perfect escape. The first night was peaceful. The fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and we settled in with a bottle of wine, feeling the weight of the city life melt away. We had the whole weekend to ourselves, and nothing seemed to threaten that. But then, things started to get strange. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up. I wasn't sure what had disturbed my sleep, but something felt off. The room was quiet, almost too quiet, and the air felt thicker than it had earlier. I lay still for a moment, listening. There it was, 2 sharp knocks on the door. I froze. The knocking had been faint, but it was clear enough to wake me. My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. A raccoon? A branch hitting the cabin in the wind? Or maybe I thought it was just the cabin settling. It was old after all. I nudged my partner, trying to wake them without making a sound. They groggily stirred, barely opening their eyes, and mumbled, "It's nothing. Go back to sleep." I hesitated but decided to let it go. The last thing I wanted to do was go outside in the middle of the night to check, especially when the knock could have been anything. We lived in the city, and even though I was used to strange sounds, I knew this place was different, more isolated. There was no one for miles, and the last thing I wanted was to walk out into the unknown. The rest of the night passed without incident, but the unease lingered. The next morning, we went about our day as planned. We hiked to a nearby overlook, cooked lunch on the porch, and spent the afternoon relaxing in the sun. It was beautiful, and for the most part, we felt at peace. The cabin was perfect, and we were alone, just like we'd wanted. That night, though, things took a turn. It happened just after dinner. We were sitting inside, playing cards, when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was the flickering of the firelight on the windows, but when I looked again, My heart skipped a beat. Someone was standing at the edge of the tree line, just beyond the porch. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe some animal standing in the shadow of the trees. But then I saw them clearly, standing there motionless, watching the cabin. I didn't say anything at first. My mind tried to rationalize it. Could have been a hiker, I thought. Maybe someone out for a midnight walk. But why hadn't they come closer? Why were they just standing there, unmoving? I nudged my partner again. This time, they saw it too. They didn't say anything, but their face tightened with concern. We both sat still, not knowing what to do. The figure didn't move, didn't even seem to acknowledge us. I stood up slowly, walking to the window. The figure remained there, just beyond the edge of the trees. It felt like it had been standing there for hours, and yet it hadn't moved a muscle. Maybe it's just someone lost, my partner finally whispered, but I wasn't convinced. There was something about the way the figure just stood there, unmoving, that didn't feel right. I had the sudden, overwhelming feeling that we were being watched, studied even. After a long moment, I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe it was to prove to myself that it was nothing, just a random person passing through. I walked toward the trees, but when I reached the edge of the porch, the figure was gone. I stood there for a while, scanning the dark line of trees, but I saw nothing. No movement, no sign of anyone, just the dense forest and the night air. Probably just a shadow, I muttered, more to myself than to anyone else. My partner came outside, standing beside me, but we didn't see anything more that night. The figure was gone, and we went back inside, locking the door behind us. We didn't sleep much that night, though. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the wind, made us jump. The next few days were a blur of quiet tension. We tried to tell ourselves it was nothing, just our minds playing tricks on us in such an isolated place. But the sightings continued. Each night, as soon as the sun dipped behind the mountains, I would notice movement just beyond the tree line. The figure would be there again, watching, always at the edge of the trees, never approaching the cabin, but always there, always watching. On the third night, we heard the knocks again, this time louder. 3 distinct knocks, followed by a long pause. I was starting to lose my nerve. The knocks had been soft the first time, almost dismissible, but now they were deliberate, sharp. Something about it felt intentional, like someone was trying to get our attention. We didn't go to the door. This time, we just sat there in the dark, holding our breath, waiting. But nothing came after that. The silence was suffocating. We were about to pack up and leave, but something kept us there. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was fear of looking over our shoulders for the rest of our lives, knowing we'd left something unfinished. But the tension kept building, each night worse than the last. On the last night, things escalated. We woke to the sound of scraping at the door. It wasn't a knock this time. It was more like fingernails dragging across the wood. I grabbed my partner's arm, trying to stay quiet, trying to breathe. The noise stopped, but I knew we couldn't stay there any longer. We had to leave. We packed in a frenzy, tossing clothes and bags into the truck. The whole time, we kept hearing the scratching noise, like someone or something was trying to get inside. As we pulled away, I glanced back at the cabin, at the dark silhouette of the trees surrounding it. The road down the mountain felt longer than it ever had. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind us, watching us from the forest. I didn't tell my partner, but my heart pounded the whole way to town. When we got back to the rental office to drop off the key, I tried to ask the owner about the cabin's history. They seemed hesitant at first, then finally spoke up. "Funny you should ask," the woman said, her voice low. "That cabin's been abandoned for years. The last tenants vanished without a trace, and no one ever figured out what happened to them. Some folks say they were stalked by someone, or something. No one ever really knew. After that, no one wanted to rent it out again. We had to lower the price to get anyone to even look at it." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't want to know the details. I just wanted to get away. We drove back home that day, and I never looked back. But every now and then, when I'm alone in a quiet place, I wonder if the figure is still out there, still watching. If we were just the latest in a long line of people who made the mistake of staying too long in that cabin, in those mountains. And maybe, just maybe, the reason no one else rents it is because someone or something never leaves. The cabin was the kind of place you imagine when you think of getting away from everything. Isolated, surrounded by thick woods, where the nearest neighbor was miles away. It seemed perfect, the kind of place where you could disconnect, hang out with friends, and just enjoy the weekend. We rented it for 2 nights. No big plans, just a break from the chaos of our everyday lives. When we arrived on Friday evening, the sun was just starting to dip behind the trees. The cabin looked like something out of an old horror movie, but in a comforting way. It was big enough for all of us, with enough space to spread out and a big porch where we could sit and enjoy the view. We unloaded the cars, brought in our bags, and cracked open a few beers to get the night started. It felt like the beginning of a perfect weekend. A few laughs, some jokes, and ghost stories. The kind of harmless stuff you tell around a campfire or when you're a bit tipsy. The first night was easy. We stayed inside, watching movies, playing cards, and talking about the stupidest things we could think of. There was no sense of danger, no sense that something was wrong. The only sounds were the occasional creak of the cabin as it settled and the chirping of crickets outside. It was peaceful. We all went to bed around midnight. The rooms were small but cozy. I remember falling asleep quickly. The sounds of the forest just outside the window, the kind of sounds you'd expect in a place that was so far removed from civilization. The next morning, we woke up to sunshine and birds singing. The day was beautiful. We made breakfast, had coffee, and spent most of the day exploring the woods around the cabin. It was quiet, but that's the thing about places like this. The quiet is so loud that you start to notice every little sound. The crunch of leaves beneath your feet, the rustle of branches in the wind, the occasional squirrel darting across the trail. We hiked around the area, checked out a nearby stream, and generally enjoyed the seclusion. By the time we came back to the cabin, the day was slipping into evening, and we were all in a good mood, tired but content. That night was different. We were sitting around, talking and laughing, and then we started hearing things. It was subtle at first, just the rustling of leaves in the wind, but then it became something more. A distinct sound, footsteps, soft, steady, as if someone was walking just outside the cabin. At first, we all looked at each other, trying to brush it off as the wind or an animal. But the sound continued. Step, step, step. The rustling of leaves followed by the unmistakable sound of someone walking in the woods. It wasn't normal. It wasn't an animal. I could tell by the way it sounded. Too deliberate, too human. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe someone had gotten lost or was out there for some reason. But the others were starting to feel uneasy too. We all stopped talking, listening intently. The footsteps came closer, then stopped. Nothing. The air in the cabin felt heavier, as though something was pressing down on us. We sat there in silence for a few minutes, each of us waiting for someone else to speak, to say it was nothing. But no one did. After a while, we decided to go check it out. We grabbed flashlights and cautiously stepped outside, thinking maybe it was just a raccoon or someone else renting a cabin nearby. The beam from my flashlight cut through the dark, but there was no one around, just trees and shadows. The woods were quiet again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that there was something out there watching us. We didn't find anything immediately, just the usual forest sounds, and the quiet that seemed to press in from all sides. But then, as we made our way around the cabin, we saw something that made my heart stop. Footprints, several sets of them, leading right up to the cabin and then circling it. They looked fresh, like someone had been walking around our cabin just minutes before we stepped outside. We followed the footprints, shining our flashlights on the ground. They were all over the place, around the front to the back, and then they stopped by the side of the cabin. We followed them as far as we could. There, next to a hidden window near the back, the prints just stopped. There were no more footprints leading away from the window. It was like whoever had been outside was watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. My stomach turned. We had been inside, unaware the whole time. Someone had been just outside, maybe even standing there, watching us laugh and joke without a care in the world. We didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run, but I didn't want to leave without knowing who or what had been out there. I suggested we call the police, and reluctantly, everyone agreed. The officer on the phone didn't seem to take it seriously at first. "It's probably some kids messing around, or maybe a local," he said. "There's not much we can do unless you find some more concrete evidence." But he agreed to send someone out to check. An hour later, the police arrived. They took a quick look around, checked for any signs of break-ins or damage, and found nothing. No sign of anyone nearby. The footprints, gone, completely disappeared, as if whoever had been there had vanished into thin air. The officer told us there was nothing they could do and said it was probably a prank, though he didn't sound entirely convinced himself. But that didn't matter to us. We knew what we had seen. The rest of the night was restless. We all tried to sleep, but no one could. Every little noise outside made us jump. We kept hearing footsteps again, but every time we checked, no one was there. We could see the shadow of the trees moving in the wind, but it felt like we were trapped inside a horror movie. Everyone kept saying things like, "It's probably nothing," or "Let's just try to sleep." But I could tell no one felt safe. I couldn't stop thinking about the footprints, how they had been circling the cabin, how they had stopped right by that hidden window. Whoever had been out there had been watching us. It wasn't just some random animal or a person lost in the woods. It felt deliberate. It felt like someone had been waiting for us to make a mistake. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know who was out there or what they wanted. But I know we didn't stay another night. The next morning, we packed up as quickly as we could. There was no arguing, no hesitation. Everyone just wanted to leave. We didn't even bother to check the woods again. We just loaded up our things, piled into the cars, and drove away as fast as we could. The drive back felt longer than it should have, like we were escaping something, and the further we got from that cabin, the more I felt the weight lifting off my chest. Even now, every time I think about that weekend, I get a tight feeling in my stomach. We were lucky. I don't know if the person or people out there were dangerous or just watching us to scare us, but I have a feeling we narrowly avoided something far worse than a prank. Something far more deliberate. Something that might have had much darker intentions. I don't know what they wanted, but I don't think we'll ever go back to that cabin, and I don't think I'll ever forget that feeling of being watched.